Hey friends, today I'm here to talk a little bit about how to fall out of handstand because it's a question that I get a lot and it is something that generally you will have to deal with. Again, I've spoken about in a few other videos. I know one or two people who learn to handstand by handstand pressing or that slow controlled float of the feet off the ground. But most people learn to handstand by kicking or jumping at some point. You may start at the wall, but at some point you need to go to the middle of the room when you feel comfortable, and you have to generally do a little hop or a jump. And so there's going to be falling involved. And what kind of falling is scary? If the hips don't come up over the shoulders all the way, we simply come back down the way we went up, right? And that's not the scary bit. It's when the hips come far past the shoulders. We can't stop ourselves with the breaking of our fingers. We can't stop ourselves with the use of our limbs, like we've talked about in some of the last few videos. If our hips have just gone too far past the shoulders and we need to somehow exit safely and with the minimum risk possible, right? Because you can fall out of handstand safely. And it can actually be really good practice because this is something that you will experience at some point in your handstand journey to practice falling, especially if it is something that is frightening to you. Because I know when something is frightening for me, my brain tends to go a little bit blank when that moment comes about. And so if we practice falling and we kind of ingrain that into our muscle memory, then even if your brain goes a little bit blank or you have a mini freak out because you're falling over, your body still knows the general movements of what to do. So before I show you my preferred way of falling, let's talk about the ways that maybe are not necessarily the best ways to fall for everyone. The first is your mind goes blank and you do nothing, right? That's happened to a lot of us, and sometimes that just results, depending on what kind of handstand you're in. If you're in like a straight up one or an L or something like that, you just simply fall flat on your back. Boom. Really unpleasant, right? Another option that people like to do is a roll. Not really my favorite unless you were some kind of gymnast or acrobat in the past, because it does encourage bending of the arms, which is not really something we want to do a lot if we're first learning handstand and we're feeling unsteady. So I don't really recommend rolling unless that's something that you're comfortable with and you're in a specific position of handstand. If you're already kind of arching over because you've kicked too hard, it's probably not an ideal time to start to roll and round through the spine. And then the more popular method of falling out that I see a lot is this fall into wheel pose or Urdhva Dhanurasana. And there is a transition where you lower from a variety of handstand versions into wheel pose slowly with control. I personally think that falling into wheel isn't really a great idea. You might not find that it bothers you at all, but if you're having trouble maintaining the integrity of your core or this relationship between your pelvis and your rib cage, and you're allowing yourself to continuously fall into wheel, which is a huge heart opener for most people, then it's going to make it even more difficult to refine that core integration over time. So that's one of the big reasons that I recommend not really falling into wheel, especially if you're finding you have this problem balancing between the ribs and the pelvis, because that's just accentuating that movement more. Secondly, for a lot of people, it is a really deep back bend, and if you haven't warmed up, massive overhead flexion of the shoulder, which hopefully you've done a little bit because you're doing handstand, right? But you haven't warmed up heart opening of the spine or maybe extension of the hips, it can be a little jammy in the low back. More than anything, for me, it's a big energy waster. So when you're learning to handstand and you are spending, if you've done a little warm up and you're spending 5-6 minutes just working on some handstand drills, maybe some L hops or some tuck jumps in the middle of the room, you might do, 50, 100, 150 hops. Can you imagine falling to wheel 150 times and having to get back out? That's not really the most energy efficient thing to do for your body. So what fall do I recommend? At Authentic Movements, we really teach primarily the cartwheel or pirouette fall. and it's just what it sounds like. It's kind of a mesh between a cartwheel and a pirouette, or a turn in handstand. It can also be used in forearm stand. It's a little bit harder, and I can show that another day to exit. But it is fairly energy efficient as long as we're being a little conscious of where we are in space. It's relatively safe for your joints. And while I do recommend working on it mostly on one side to start with, over time you can get comfortable falling out in either direction. And that way, depending on what leg variation you're doing, you can choose which way you twist. It's also not that challenging, although for a lot of people, when we're flipped upside down, things get a little challenging direction-wise. So that is why I recommend practicing. So what is a cartwheel or pirouette fall? I'm going to attempt to demonstrate a fall in slow motion, which is always fun. And then I'll do it in regular time, as well as show you how you can practice it using the wall as well. So let's say, for the sake of today, that we're doing some L handstand hops. And if you're not sure what those are, it's just hopping to the L position of handstand. And let's say we don't hop very hard at first, so the hips don't stack over the shoulders, and we just come right back down the way we came, and it's no big deal, right? And then we decide we're going to give it a little more oomph. And we start to let the hips go past the shoulders. Of course, you're going to go in faster motion than I am right now. I'm going to twist towards my strong arm. That's my right arm. That alleviates some pressure on the left shoulder as I turn towards my right arm. Push, push, push through the right hand. Push, push, push. Alleviates more pressure on the left shoulder. Start to bend my legs to absorb the shock as I land. Oh, notice my hands are still on the ground. If I whip my hands continuously off the ground each time after having the whole weight of my body on them, it can just start to give a little bit of strain or sprain to some of the small muscles in the forearm that help to protect the wrist and the hand. So all I did was twist towards the side I'm more comfortable on, which is my right side, as I pushed extra firmly through that arm. That's going to alleviate some of the pressure on the left shoulder because that's going to have a lot more twist in it, being the side a little bit closer to the twist. So if I push firmly through my right arm, alleviate some pressure on my left shoulder, bend my knees to absorb the shock as I land, keep my hands on the floor. That's it. Now, of course, you usually don't fall in slow motion. So what might it look like in regular time? It might look like something like this. You're doing some hops. You're doing some hops, and then you decide to really go for it. You're just like, all right, I'm going to let the weight shift to my fingers. I'm going to do all the things she said. I'm going to let this strong leg be an antenna, and I'm going to hop, twist, land. Of course, the harder you kick, the faster you have to use the hips to twist towards that preferred arm. Twist, push, bend your knees as you land. And then, obviously, once you're comfortable with one side and it becomes almost automatic, it is useful to practice on the other side so that you get a little bit more leniency. Because if we keep pushing on one side, that one arm that you say is your stronger or your better, your favorite arm or whatever, is going to end up being stronger over time. And the other one's going to get less and less used, right? Of course, we're only doing this for 5 to 10 minutes a day, so it's not a huge deal if you want to stay twisting to one side for a little while. So again, just to showcase that, hopping, and then we decide to go for it. Oh, twist. So, how do we practice that? Well, if you're like, that is really scary, there's a few ways you can practice it. The first is using that L drill that we showed at the wall. And you can look back at a previous video to find that. But if you find yourself in that L position, that's a great place to psych yourself up and be like, great, I'm going to work on that twist now. You can even circle your leg down as you twist towards your hands. Notice I'm still on the wall with my foot. Twist towards my right arm, push through my right arm. I can almost reach the floor as I'm like, oh, great place to practice. Now, if you're like, nope, still seems too crazy, work on ugly cartwheels. And the point of this is not to have a beautiful cartwheel, even if you already have a beautiful cartwheel. It's to feel a little bit awkward because falling is generally a bit awkward. For most of us, it doesn't feel super graceful. So when we do a cartwheel, usually our hands turn. But in a handstand, our hands are kind of straight, same direction as our feet, right? Parallel to our feet. So if it feels too scary to do that right away, don't start all the way like this, but maybe start somewhere in between. Put your hands down. Don't worry about getting the legs straight or anything like that. Think about simply getting the hips up as you twist. Again, I'm going to twist towards the right, but you choose. So my left leg's up in the air, which means I'm going to twist towards my right arm. Kick, twist. And just start working on these ugly or awkward cartwheels. Notice how over time they start to become less scary, more automatic. Maybe go to practicing this from the wall, from that walk up L position. Notice how it's still, your body is okay, especially if you're gripping the floor with your fingers and pushing the ground away and breathing. And then over time, you can start to integrate that into your hopping or jumping in the middle of the room. Because for a lot of us, myself included, when we're jumping in the middle of the room, we think that we don't have the power in our legs. We just can't get our hips up high enough. So much of that is the fear factor of just not knowing exactly what we're going to do if we need to fall out, or not wanting to waste the energy of falling into something like wheel, or whether it's recognizable or not, or automatic, stopping ourselves by pushing all the weight into the heel of our hands instead of letting it transfer to our fingertips, because maybe deep down we are a little bit afraid of letting those hips go past the shoulders. So I hope that was helpful for you. I do encourage that you practice falling with things like handstand and forearm stand, because then it becomes simple and automatic and just another part of your practice, whether it is as graceful as you want or not. If you're looking for more, I have ebooks on handstand and handstand pressing. You can find them via my website, as well as online inversion clinics through authenticmovements.com. So thanks for joining me today, and see you next time.